Any close there?
Yeah, thank you, Speaker, for the opportunity.
And take 3 minutes each.
I'll also join my colleagues in confirming that the wisdom of this House in forming the Delegated Legislation Committee was to ensure that all statutory instruments, in other words, subsidiary legislation, is brought for approval in this House. And Mr. Speaker, in the Statutory Instruments Act, Section 11 deals with the laying of statutory instruments on the floor of the House, on the table of the House. And therefore, Section 11 says that the authority that it makes a statutory instrument must lay it within 7 days. Again, Section 11, Part 4 says that if they fail to do so, then that legislation ceases to have effect. Mr. Speaker, the problem that is there is that you need to define, to understand the definition of a statutory instrument. Mr. Speaker, some of these statutory instruments are actually pronouncements that have effect of law. How do you lay a pronouncement on the table of the House? And Mr. Speaker, you'll be surprised to note that even the education system that we are talking about reforming, the CBC education system was never brought to the floor of this House. And there are so many regulations that are also affected. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that you give the House and the Delegated Legislation Committee authority to pick any legislation that they hear that is out there, because we are out there representing people. If we get any legislation that is being made out there, we bring it to the floor, we address it as a committee, and we table it on the floor of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Gilgil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise from where Honourable Mbui has stopped, because I sat in that committee in 12th Parliament, and I think the Committee on Delegated Legislation has a lot of power that they can actually exercise. Any legislation or regulations that have come before the committee and have not been tabled officially, Mr. Speaker, they should actually annul them immediately, Mr. Speaker. Let them go back to the drawing board, the regulation makers, Mr. Speaker, and submit the regulations again, Mr. Speaker. That way, and I saw it happening in last Parliament, Mr. Speaker, we will exercise and be able to stamp back the authority of this House, because we are protected by the law under Section 11, and we are also protected by the Constitution under Article 125. If you feel that any issue out there is being abused, this committee, Mr. Speaker, can be able to actually bring back the dignity of this House, annul the regulations, bring the report on this floor, let the regulation makers go back to the drawing board and resubmit the regulations, Mr. Speaker. That way, the committee will assert themselves right from the start, because the mischief that we saw, Mr. Speaker, is that they wait for the time to almost lapse, and they bring with an idea that it can just self-operate and be able to run without going through the committee. So I hope that the ruling will also guide the committee to actually endorse and actually exercise their powers in annulling all the regulations. Let us go back to the drawing board, Mr. Speaker. That way, the role of Parliament will be protected, and we'll be able to assert ourselves in the 13th Parliament, and the new government, Mr. Speaker, will know that you cannot just make regulations as you wish. It has to be in accordance to the law and in accordance to the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I will extend to one more Honourable Kamket, and told he was the chair of delegated legislation. And the last, and I believe from where he comes from, is the biggest victim of such.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, indeed, as you've stated, as we speak, Mr. Speaker, there is a security operation in my constituency that has not been enforced through the law. Mr. Speaker, as we were winding up in the last Parliament, as chairman of this particular committee, if honorable members who are in that Parliament remember, most of the reports that we brought to this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, had one conclusion: annul in entirety. Annul in entirety all the regulations. You know why? Because, Mr. Speaker, most of the regulatory making bodies really had a lot of issues that the regulations they made had issues that were not, either they never conducted public participation, which is a very key element in our constitution, and therefore those who are going to be the users of those the regulations were going to suffer in a very big way. Mr. Speaker, as you make your ruling on this matter, let your ruling, Mr. Speaker, not only become a reminder of the existence of this committee, but also an enforcement of the rule of law, as correctly stated and quoted by the Leader of Majority. Mr. Speaker, as I finish, there is another mischief that I have noticed, and I want to urge honorable members, and especially the Leader of Majority and all honorable members, Mr. Speaker, that there is another mischief that the state agencies, especially the ministries, use in order to hide bad laws. They used this omnibus thing called the Status Law Miscellaneous Amendment Bill. That is the time they hide bad laws, and they know that members will not have time to scrutinize. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, as you make your ruling on the committee or on the matter of delegated legislation, that's a matter also you may want to consider, because very many state agencies have taken advantage and introduced or amended law in a way that is not helpful to the citizens. I thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you, honorable members. Indeed, the matter raised by the Honorable Chepkong